Welcome to the deep dive.
Mm.
I want you to picture someone in your mind right now. Just, imagine someone who has spent their entire professional life completely bound by the strictest, most rigorous black and white rules imaginable.
Mm.
We are talking about the law, right? The rigid architecture of precedents, statutes, administrative codes, all those bureaucratic decrees.
Yeah, a very structured existence.
Exactly. Now, take that exact same person, and I want you to imagine them as a master of the boundless, rule-breaking, emotionally raw, and just muddily fluid world of poetry.
It sounds like a total paradox, doesn't it?
It really is.
Because we typically view the analytical mind and the creative spirit as these warring factions. Like one usually suffocates the other, or they are just kept strictly quarantined in separate parts of a person's life.
Right. You don't expect the person writing some dense 400-page legal decision on civil rights law to just turn around and write a devastatingly vulnerable poem about the human soul.
No, you really don't.
But that tension, that exact contradiction, is why we are here today. We are exploring the upcoming March 2026 release of the poetry collection, Omnibus Poetry, Zilverzicht Captive.
And the mind behind this work is Manuel de Valle y Colón.
Yes. And just to give you, the listener, a sense of who we are dealing with before we really get into the weeds here, he is an Ivy League-educated legal scholar, a former chief administrative law judge, a deeply influential civil rights advocate, and somehow, through all of that, a prolific poet.
Yeah, the scope of the source material we have today is just immense. I mean, we are pulling from his biographical records, his legal publications, personal tributes, and of course, excerpts from this new poetry collection.
Yeah, a lot of ground to cover.
It really is. We are going to track a journey from the public housing projects of East Harlem all the way to the highest courts in the land. But what makes this genuinely compelling isn't just the geography of his life. It's the philosophical journey. Because we are going to be moving from ancient ancestral rhythms to the bleeding edge of artificial intelligence.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the mission of this deep dive isn't just to, read a timeline of man's life. This is really an exploration of the core theme of his new work, which is captivity.
Right.
Manuel is looking at the invisible cages that every single one of us lives in right now. The relentless pursuit of billable hours. The exhausting hollow chase for social media likes. Even the algorithmic echo chambers that are quietly shaping our realities.
Yeah, the digital cages.
Exactly. We want to figure out how we build these cages, how we get trapped in them, and based on his writings, how we might actually break free.
And he is uniquely positioned to write about this, He isn't observing these cages from some isolated ivory tower.
No.
He has spent his life in the trenches of the legal system, right in the heart of urban America, really examining how bureaucracies and modern illusions impact real, breathing people.
So to understand the architect of justice, we kind of have to understand where the foundation was poured. I know you've been deep in his biographical record. Set the scene for us. What kind of environment shaped him?
Well, the foundation begins in October 1948 in New York City.
Okay.
He was born the eldest son to Puerto Rican parents. His father was from Hatillo, his mother from Mocha. And his early childhood was spent in the Carver houses in East Harlem and later the Douglas projects on the west side.
So we are talking about the New York City, the 1950s and 60s. That is a very specific, incredibly complex cultural moment.
It is. I mean, it's the height of the great Puerto Rican migration to New York. You have these vibrant, really tight-knit communities forming within the concrete grid of the city, and they are often facing intense systemic marginalization.
Right.
He is navigating public schools, PS 72, junior high 54, in neighborhoods that are tough but diverse and culturally rich. But what really alters his trajectory happens in 1962 when he enters Brooklyn Technical High School.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That is a massive pivot.
Huge.
Entering the crucible of Brooklyn Tech in 1962, that puts him in one of the most intellectually elite, high-pressure environments in the country. And he's, what, just 14 years old?
Yeah, exactly.
How does a kid from the Douglas projects assimilate into that kind of intense academic machinery?
By not just assimilating, but voraciously absorbing everything it has to offer. We actually have this fascinating artifact in the source material.
So the yearbook.
Yes, excerpts from his 1966 Brooklyn Tech yearbook. And it isn't just a handful of generic, have a great summer signatures. It is a massive wall of notes that really paints a psychological portrait of a teenage polymath.
I was actually looking at those earlier. What did his peers really see in him at that age?
They saw a heavyweight intellect. You have a note from a student named Robert Snyder saying, "Best of luck in your search for complete knowledge."
Wow.
I know, right? That is a surprisingly heavy philosophical wish for a high school senior.
It really is.
Another student writes, to an amateur historian. Someone else writes, lots of luck, Congressman.
Uh-huh, Congressman.
Yeah, they are already projecting this massive institutional future onto him. And the diversity of the students signing the book is striking. I mean, he is swimming, fencing, debating. He is in the Free World Club polling squad. They actually modeled New York City elections.
He's stepping into leadership roles, too,
Yeah.
right? Because he was elected Issues and Actions chairman of the Aspira Clubs Federation while he was still in high school.
Exactly.
Which means he is being mentored by giants like Antonio Pantoja, building a foundation in advocacy before he even gets a diploma. But what happens when he leaves New York? Because his academic path from there is almost dizzying.
The momentum is staggering. So he is selected for a postgraduate year at the Yale Transitional Year Program.
Okay.
Then he goes to Wesleyan. He studies Spanish literature in Madrid, dives into Puerto Rican history at the University of Puerto Rico, and eventually transfers to Princeton University in 1969.
I want to push on that for a second.
Yeah.
Transferring into Princeton in 1969, that is an institution steeped in tradition, wealth, and very rigid historical demographics.
Very rigid.
How does a young Puerto Rican man from Harlem navigate that specific space? Does he adapt to Princeton, or does he try to adapt Princeton to him?
He absolutely forces the institution to expand.
Really?
Oh, yeah. He majors in history, Latin American, and Afro-American studies. But he doesn't just attend classes. He founds the Latino organization on campus. He actively recruits Latinos and Latinas. And perhaps most impressively, he gets the university to institute one of the first Ivy League seminars on the history and politics of Puerto Rico.
Wait, an undergraduate student essentially mandated a new curriculum in an Ivy League school.
Essentially, yes.
That's incredible.
And his academic work wasn't just staying in the classroom either. His senior thesis was a history of Puerto Rican students and public education.
Yeah.
A chapter of that thesis made its way into a memorandum for Senator Jacob Javits, for whom Manuel was interning. And that exact same research was later utilized by the Puerto Rican Legal Defense and Education Fund to frame their complaint in the landmark case Aspira versus Board of Education of the City of New York.
Let's contextualize that for the listener, because that case isn't just a footnote.
Not at all.
That resulted in a consent decree that fundamentally altered the educational landscape of New York City, legally mandating bilingual education for limited English-speaking children. His undergraduate homework literally changed civil rights law.
It is a perfect example of what his biographical summary refers to as the theme of passage and return.
Passage and return.
Right. He travels through these elite, historically rigid institutions, eventually graduating from Yale Law School in 1974, by the way, alongside classmates like Clarence Thomas and Lonnie Guinier.
Wow.
He sits in the highest echelons of academic power, but he never severs the tie to his roots. The return part of that phrase is using that acquired power, that elite legal training, to fight for the community that built him.
Mentorship seems to be the through line here. There's a deeply moving tribute in the materials from a Dr. Daniel Ibarrondo that really struck me.
The Ibarrondo tribute is crucial because it shows how Manuel's philosophy was applied to individual lives, not just these massive legal cases.
Right. Dr. Ibarrondo describes growing up with parents who had a second-grade education. And he had a sixth-grade teacher who gave him a very dangerous but beautiful piece of advice, which was to question everything.
Which is great advice until you actually start doing it.
Exactly.
Because Ibarrondo starts questioning the poverty in his neighborhood, the systemic issues. He goes to Puerto Rico looking for his identity, but he finds this colonized curriculum that teaches him U.S. history while completely ignoring his own heritage.
Right.
He's a young man armed with brilliant questions, but absolutely no framework. And then he meets Manuel del Valle at Fordham.
Yes. And Ibarrondo explicitly calls Manuel the bridge.
The bridge.
Manuel didn't just hand up answers right. He taught him how to conceptualize his anger, his curiosity, and his history. He taught him how to build a professional armor. Ibarrondo notes that Manuel's influence is actually echoing through a historical book on Pedro Albizu Campos that he's currently editing decades later.
Mentorship is such an overused buzzword today, you know, usually meaning like a coffee chat once a quarter.
Yeah,
exactly.
But this is deep architectural mentorship. And Ibarrondo wasn't the only person viewing Manuel as a bridge. Let's look at his time teaching at Princeton School of Public and International Affairs.
Okay.
He was introduced to a young undergraduate woman there who would eventually become quite well known.
Yes. Sonia Sotomayor.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Decades after they met, Manuel attended her investiture as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, and we have the exact inscription she wrote to him in her memoir.
I love this quote.
She wrote, "Manuel, you were my first role model, someone with a passion for fighting for change. Thank you for all you have done for so many and for what you continue to do."
To be identified as the first role model for a future Supreme Court justice, I mean, it forces you to reckon with the sheer gravitational pull of his integrity.
It really does.
It raises a question for anyone listening, really. When you audit your own life, who was that bridge for you? Who helped you conceptualize your place in the world? Not by just telling you what to think, but by showing you how to challenge the structure around you. I want you to keep that question in the back of your mind, because it is that exact tension between mastering the rigid structures of the world and fiercely protecting the human soul within them that bleeds directly into the pages of this new poetry collection, Captive.
Yeah.
He is taking that razor-sharp, analytical, legal mind, and he is turning it inward. He is no longer just looking at the physical or legal cages of society. He is looking at the psychological ones.
Right. He dedicates the book to those held captive by traditions, urbanity, and beliefs in a world that was actually created for freedom. He is diagnosing the modern human condition through these incredibly vivid, specific vignettes.
Let's dive into some of these vignettes. There's a poem about a social media influencer that feels painfully relevant today. It's a total deconstruction of the modern illusion of success.
It is a brutal and precise portrait. He describes a woman who is completely captive to the false admiration of her followers. She is embroiled in scandals that have absolutely no foundation in truth. They are purely generated for the algorithm, just for publicity. Her entire existence is built on the accumulation of wealth and material signaling.
She is wearing the latest fashion, presenting this seamless false self to basically sell the goods of modernity. But the poem focuses on the internal rot.
Exactly.
She is watching her own soul being consumed by the weight of this superficiality. It's the paradox of the attention economy, right?
Yeah.
The more people look at you, the more invisible you actually feel.
And this is where Manuel introduces a vital mental model for the listener. He argues that her captivity is born of verticality.
Verticality.
Right. Verticality is the hierarchy of likes, status, wealth. It's the constant climbing of a social ladder where someone is always above you and someone is always below you. His proposed liberation for her is to completely abandon verticality and embrace the horizontal equality proffered by nature.
That is a beautiful concept, the equality of nature. What does that actually look like in the context of the poem?
Well, it means trading the hierarchy of the internet for the harmony of lakes and rivers. The wind in her hair, the sand beneath her feet. Nature doesn't rank you. The ocean doesn't care how many followers you have.
True.
He suggests that true liberation comes from embracing the impermanence of a sunny day, or finding joy in the genuine, unmonetized laughter of a village child. It's a complete rejection of the curate itself in favor of the natural self.
But that verticality trap isn't just for influencers, though. He turns that exact same lens on the corporate world. There is a deeply poignant poem about a lawyer making porridge late at night.
Yes.
And knowing Manuel's background, this one feels like it has some serious autobiographical DNA.
Oh, undoubtedly. The poem outlines the physical and spiritual toll of a 14-hour workday. We have a lawyer who is stressed, exhausted, and entirely captive to the desire for promotion. He is trapped in a firm where competition is the only metric of value and billable hours dictate his worth as a human being.
But the focus of the poem isn't the law firm, right? It's the quiet moment in his kitchen afterward. He is making porridge. And porridge is such a specific, humble, slow food. He is singing a lullaby, sharing this simple meal with his partner. It is a fleeting moment of pure normalcy away from the briefs and court orders.
The pivot in the poem comes from his partner, actually. She doesn't yell at him to quit his job. She just gives him a gentle nudge. She suggests they make plans to visit their aging parents in the village. She reminds him that he will find tranquility there, that the vertical climb of the law firm isn't the only reality.
And he realizes she is entirely right. The poem ends with him making the porridge, singing freely, realizing that, as Manuel writes, there is more to making a porridge than what the modern world would ever understand.
Yeah.
The act of stirring a pot for someone you love is an act of defiance against a system that only values your quantifiable output.
It is a quiet rebellion, but, not everyone has a partner to pull them back from the brink. What happens when you fully surrender to the cage of corporate verticality?
Right.
Manuel explores that dark extreme in the poem about the abusive boss.
This one's like a psychological thriller in miniature.
It really is.
He sets a very stark scene. 4 identical cubicles right outside the boss's office. The laptops, the uniformed chairs, the harsh lighting that forces the workers to look at each other while they endure this toxic environment. They were using private group chats on their phones just to emotionally survive the boss's screaming fits.
On the surface, the workers are the captives. They are captive to his raging emotions and his power over their livelihoods. But the expert twist here is Manuel's analysis of the boss himself. The workers view the boss as a tyrant, the apex predator of the firm. But the poem peels back the layers to show that the boss is actually the most trapped person in the room.
How so? I mean, the boss holds all the cards.
He holds the professional cards, sure, but internally, he is captive to a crippling perfectionism. This drive for flawless execution and dominance has produced an acute state of insomnia. He is physically and mentally breaking down, and he basically uses his employees as a safety valve for his own torment. He is trapped in a cage built of impossibly high standards and the steep internal price of his own cruelty.
So the cage of success is just as ironclad as the cage of failure.
Exactly.
And the resolution to this poem is brilliant. A new assistant arrives, a newbie, who hasn't been institutionalized by the firm's culture yet. The boss screams at them, and the assistant just quits on the spot. They tell the boss that success is no license for cruelty.
That newbie is the disruption of the system. By walking away, they shatter the illusion that the boss's power justifies his abuse. It proves that the cage only exists as long as everyone agrees to stay inside it.
And if you stay in that cage your entire life, you end up like the subject of another heartbreaking piece, the regret of the dying man.
Yeah, that one is heavy.
This is a guy who won the game. He chased the likes, he accumulated unbridled power, he treated human beings as mere stepping stones, he built an entire reality out of visual plasticity and marketing hype.
He was a philosopher of the superficial. But the tragedy, as Manuel outlines, is that the entire artifice instantly evaporates the moment he receives a terminal diagnosis. When faced with mortality, the verticality means absolutely nothing. He stops caring about his followers, his influence, his money. His final, deepest yearning isn't for another corporate victory. He just wants to be 5 years old again, blowing bubbles in his backyard.
It's devastating. We build these massive, complex architectures, prestigious careers, curated online lives, gated communities just to feel safe and important, but they just become our prisons. And Manuel argues that this captivity is literally altering our biology.
Yes, he traces this down to the evolutionary level in the poem Suppressed Anger. This is a fascinating intersection of biology and sociology. He writes about the ancient reptilian part of the human brain, the survival mechanisms, the fight-or-flight rage that kept our ancestors alive against predators. They are still inside us, but they are suppressed by the rules of modernity.
Because we don't have saber-toothed tigers to fight anymore. We have bureaucracies.
Exactly. We are so disconnected from natural autonomy. We don't control our environments, our schedules, or even the seasons in our climate-controlled offices. And because we are stripped of natural agency, that ancient suppressed rage has nowhere to go. So it gets triggered by the most absurd, minor inconveniences of modern life.
The poem uses the specific example of a missing item in the refrigerator. And I think we all been there. You can't find the mustard, and suddenly you want to tear the kitchen apart.
It sounds comical, but Manuel treats it with profound seriousness. A missing item leads to a slammed door, a dropped dish, shouting. The demands of modern scripts have eroded our natural coping mechanisms.
Yeah.
He argues that this trivial anger is actually the last desperate gasp of freedom against an anonymous bureaucratic state. But the tragedy is that it ends up menacing the people we love in our own homes. We're captive to an evolutionary biology that is fiercely clashing with a world that wasn't built for the human nervous system.
So if you are listening to this on your commute or while you're making dinner, I really want you to audit your own life for a second. Which of these cages feels the most familiar? Are you the lawyer, convinced that just one more promotion, one more 14-hour day will finally bring you peace? Are you letting an algorithm dictate your self-worth based on how many people engaged with your post today? Or are you the person screaming at the refrigerator because the sheer weight of modern bureaucracy has left you with zero emotional bandwidth?
Recognizing the specific shape of your cage is the first prerequisite for escaping it. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the cages we've discussed so far, the ego, the workplace, our own suppressive biology, those are mostly internal. As we move into the next phase of Manuel's work, the scope gets significantly wider and, frankly, a lot darker.
Yeah, it does.
He begins to examine systemic technological captivity, the digital panopticon.
And this is where his background as a chief administrative law judge merges forcefully with his poetry. Now, before we explore these specific poems, I need to pause and establish a very clear boundary for us and the listener.
Right, very important.
The source material we are about to unpack touches on highly sensitive, intensely debated sociopolitical issues. We're talking about government use of artificial intelligence, algorithmic discrimination, and the regulation of speech. As your hosts, we are remaining entirely impartial.
Completely.
We are not endorsing these viewpoints, nor are we critiquing them from any left-wing or right-wing perspective. Our sole mission today is to accurately and deeply explore the legal and philosophical arguments presented by Manuel del Valle y Colón in his poetry.
That impartiality is vital because Manuel is issuing some profound systemic warnings here. He is diagnosing a new era of technological captivity. Let's start with his exploration of the echo chamber.
Okay.
He writes a line that is incredibly piercing. Echo chambers do not need to be tolerant. They just do not understand what it is they are echoing.
That reframes the whole concept. We usually think of echo chambers as groups of malicious people shutting out dissenting opinions. But he is saying the algorithm itself is agnostic to truth or tolerance. It just blindly reinforces whatever keeps you engaged.
Exactly. He describes a digital reality where algorithms provide only likes. They filter out differences, controversy, and nuance. People end up living in customized silos restricted to sole source realities. Now, you might ask, isn't personalization a good thing? Isn't it nice when your feed gives you exactly what you want to see?
Right, that's the tech industry's defense, isn't it? We are just optimizing for user preference. What is Manuel's counterargument to that?
His counterargument is that this intense, automated personalization blurs the line between truth and lies. It creates an amalgamation of tailored social environments where uniformity is enforced as the ultimate truth. The individual loses the ability to navigate a shared reality. He warns that a wrong response, an unexpected or dissenting thought, is the only thing that actually challenges the machine. But the machine is designed to quickly identify and filter out that friction to keep you comfortable and compliant.
It's the ultimate velvet prison. But he takes this critique much deeper into the realm of surveillance and algorithmic bias. And the sociological frameworks he uses here are heavy. He takes W.E.B. Du Bois' concept of double consciousness and applies it to the digital age.
This is one of the most brilliant intellectual leaps in the entire collection.
Let's break that down.
For those who might not be familiar with the original context, Du Bois introduced double consciousness in the souls of Black folk to describe the psychological challenge of Black Americans being forced to view their own identity through the eyes of a racist oppressor society.
Right.
It is the feeling of always measuring your soul by the tape of a world that looks on in amused contempt and pity.
So how does Manuel map a 1903 sociological concept onto 21st century algorithms?
He argues that digital surveillance forces marginalized communities to move through dominant spaces with a newly coded gaze of the oppressor.
Okay.
Algorithms, predictive policing, and credit scoring systems are often trained by homogenous groups, historically white males. This creates what he calls the coded gaze. It forces invisible communities to wear a false internal mask to survive the metrics of the digital economy. They become captive to the external, automated eyes of the dominant culture.
And he connects this directly to Foucauldian surveillance, right?
Yes.
Foucault's concept of the panopticon, the prison design, where the inmates know they can be watched at any given second, so they eventually just internalize the rules and police themselves. Manuel is saying our devices have turned the entire world into a digital panopticon.
Precisely. The alienating effects of constant monitoring, whether by the government, your employer, or social media platforms, break down intimacy and privacy. We abandon our authentic behavior in favor of uniformity to ensure we aren't flagged by the system.
Right. Stay in line.
Demographics are commodified. Data becomes capital. And we are reduced to digital serfs, subject to constant online association, ranking, and scoring.
But the tech companies and institutions would argue that algorithms remove human bias. They would say that a computer doesn't see race or class, it just sees data points. It's purely mathematical.
And that is exactly where Manuel's experience as an administrative law judge strikes back. He dismantles that defense with a concept he calls the facial neutrality of numbers.
Explain that, because it sounds like a crucial legal distinction.
He argues that using numerical density or pure data as a proxy for equality never works because it completely marginalizes the individual context.
Okay.
The facial neutrality of numbers offers a fake transparency. A system might not explicitly ask for your race or class, but it uses zip codes, purchasing habits, or loan histories as proxies. The algorithm essentially endorses and automates patent historical discrimination, but it hides it under the unassailable guise of neutral mathematical efficiency.
It's an incredible translation of complex civil rights law into poetic verse. But his warnings get even starker when he pivots to the government's use of artificial intelligence and the manipulation of reality.
He writes a poem arguing that the government's altered AI depiction of reality is a fundamental form of abuse. He uses the word Orwellian, pointing to a desire not merely to control speech, but to control history itself by creating digital figures that never existed or synthesizing circumstances that never occurred.
And what happens when we start treating these machines as entities with rights? Because that is a very real legal debate happening right now. Shouldn't AI have free speech protections?
Manuel emphatically argues no. He points out the biological and spiritual reality. AI has no mental consciousness, it has no dignity, it feels no empathy, possesses no associated thought, and has no volitional memory.
Right.
Therefore, machine-generated content is not speech, because speech requires intentionality and humanity.
He's warning against extending the legal fiction of corporate personhood to machines.
Exactly. He argues that comparing a massive language model to a human being makes no philosophical or legal sense. If we become captive to the notion that legal fictions override reality, that a lack of humanity doesn't matter as long as the output is efficient, we could end up with an absurd, terrifying outcome.
Like what?
He warns that if we commodify AI outcomes and manipulate billions of users through chatbots without holding the human owners liable, we might eventually convince ourselves that AI chatbots have the right to vote.
A democracy no longer of the people, but of the machines. It is a chilling dystopian vision. But Manuel isn't just a poet of despair, right? He's a judge. He proposes actual legal frameworks to prevent this.
He does. He advocates for the creation of a Bill of Rights for humanity. He demands the implementation of what he calls due process by design.
Due process by design. So baking the legal protections into the code itself before it's deployed.
Yes. He argues we need independent watchdogs to review these systems before they go live. We need to evaluate how the data structures are built, what historical biases are embedded in the training data, and stop the harm before it is unleashed under the banner of technological progress.
When you look at his proposed solutions, you could draw a direct line back to his 1960s activism.
Oh, absolutely.
He is doing the exact same thing he did with bilingual education at Princeton. He is fighting against massive, rigid systems that try to silence, marginalize, or homogenize diverse human voices. Whether it's a school board ignoring a Puerto Rican student or a black box algorithm denying a loan, he is demanding transparency, due process, and a fierce defense of individual humanity.
It is a stunning consistency of character over 50 years.
So again, I want to turn to the listener. Think about your own digital consumption. Think about how often you consume mere sound bites or 15-second videos instead of full stories. One of Manuel's poems notes that we are no longer captives to the news. Only headlines and video clips will do to inform an entire nation. This artificial brevity fits perfectly into our overscheduled vertical lives. But what is the cost?
The cost is profound instability. This constant scrolling, this bombardment of out-of-context data, creates depression, dark moods, and anxiety. As Manuel writes, it disarms the soul.
But he also says the cure for getting off this algorithmic treadmill is shockingly simple. It is taking a single intentional breath and bringing the machine to a halt. In that specific moment of pause, the memes, the outrage, the likes, they all instantly lose their power.
And that profound, simple act of stopping is the perfect bridge to the final section of our deep dive. We have thoroughly explored the cages, the ego, the corporate grind, the digital panopticon. Now we have to look at the keys. How do we break out? What are the solutions Manuel hides within his poetry?
The solutions he offers are deeply rooted in nature, mindfulness, and a return to first principles. Let's look at the poem about the lawyer who is no longer captive by cases. This is a masterclass in intellectual liberation.
It's a brilliant scenario. You have a lawyer who is completely stuck. He has a complex case with absolutely no precedent.
Right.
There are no prior rulings to rely on, no statutes that perfectly fit. The established legal jargon and the rigid rules of the system offer him zero path forward.
In a system built entirely on precedent, having no precedent is terrifying. So what is his solution?
He drops the system entirely. He stops trying to force the issue into a pre-existing legal box. He lets go of the jargon and returns to basic human first principles: fairness, equity, and reasonableness.
Wow.
And the moment he lets go of the rigid structure, the answer reveals itself as if written on a giant billboard. The demand being made by the opposing side is simply unreasonable.
It is such a powerful metaphor for how we approach our own lives. When the established scripts, the career path you were supposed to take, the timeline you were supposed to follow, when they stop making sense, you don't need to force it. Sometimes, dropping the expected protocols and returning to your own core values is the only way to find clarity.
Liberation requires trusting your own internal compass rather than blindly following the external precedent.
But sometimes, liberation isn't an intellectual exercise. Sometimes it shows up completely uninvited and makes a mess of your plans. And that brings us to the poem about the stray dog, which might be my favorite piece in the entire collection.
It is wonderfully joyful. The poem centers on a man who lives in a highly secure, gated community. He is surrounded by walls, security guards, and rigid rules designed to keep the unpredictable world out.
Okay.
He goes for a walk, and he is followed home by a small, brown-haired terrier.
The dog has no collar, no leash, and absolutely no respect for the gated community's rules. It just decides, I live with you now.
Haha, exactly. And the man allows himself to be made captive by this stray dog. But it is a willing, joyful captivity. The family takes the dog in. They turn their pristine patio into a messy sanctuary. The dog becomes the fierce guardian of the home, barking at intruders, including the local iguanas.
The beautiful image in this poem is the daughter's face, shining with the pure joy of having a pet to love. The sterile rigidity of the gated community is completely shattered by this unplanned, chaotic bundle of life. It flips the entire concept of the book on its head. Being captive to love, to responsibility for another living thing, actually gives life meaning. It's the isolation that is the true cage.
It's about letting the natural rhythm of life break through the artificial walls we build. And speaking of rhythm, Manuel explores that concept quite literally in a brilliant poem about music.
Right, he writes about this relentless musical beat echoing in someone's head. Bow-dum-pow, bam-ro-ra.
Yeah.
It is the sound of Bourbon Street jazz, the wail of saxophones and clarinets, the driving force of guitars.
He isn't just describing a fun night out either. He describes this rhythm as a visceral tool for tearing down obstacles. It is a way of engaging the spirits and revitalizing your own soul. Tapping into ancestral rhythms, into pure creative expression, frees the human spirit from the sterile logic of modern bureaucracy. The song of the heart defies the spreadsheet.
He looks at the extremes of creative performance, too. There's a wild poem about an idol group. He paints this incredibly vivid, almost surreal picture of singers rehearsing relentlessly, showing immense physical and vocal discipline, all to perform explosive lyrics from a giant balloon shaped like a pirate ship.
It sounds chaotic, but it highlights a profound truth about human endeavor. Performing at that level is a massive gamble. It requires making yourself incredibly vulnerable. But by committing to that discipline and that absurdity, they create transcendent, unforgettable memories for thousands of people.
Yeah.
It is a loud, colorful rebellion against the ordinary, proving that chasing a dream can become a sustainable way of life.
But liberation doesn't always have to be a stadium performance or a massive life change. Sometimes the most powerful acts of rebellion are incredibly quiet, small, and intimate. Let's talk about the footpath.
This poem stands in direct contrast to the lawyer making porridge from earlier in the collection. Here we have a multi-million-dollar divorce lawyer. His entire daily existence is built on conflict. He lives in courtrooms, managing high-stress negotiations, absorbing the emotional wreckage of broken marriages.
But the scene Manuel paints isn't in the courtroom. The lawyer is sitting quietly on his porch. He's prepared a foot bath with warm water and herbs. His partner has left him a pastry and a glass of orange juice. There's a small dog sleeping nearby. And the most crucial detail of the entire poem, his laptop is sitting right there, and he is completely, intentionally ignoring it.
He is looking out at the skyline. He is actively letting go of the tension of what tomorrow's negotiations might bring. He is surrendering to the sublime physical warmth of the water on his feet. It is a profound rejection of artificial urgency. He's refusing to let the machine dictate his present moment.
And Manuel highlights this philosophy of pacing with a really thought-provoking analogy about how we eat. He contrasts the act of eating with chopsticks versus eating with a knife and fork.
This is where his sociological observation is at its sharpest. He points out that the physical tools we use dictate our experience of the world. Eating with chopsticks forces you to take smaller morsels. It requires a different dexterity, a different focus.
It physically prevents you from shoveling food into your mouth.
Exactly. It slows the entire meal down. Manuel likens the pacing of a meal eaten with chopsticks to a Gregorian chant with sparse and long sustained notes.
That's a great image.
He is making a much broader philosophical point about cultural pacing. How we physically interact with the world changes our spiritual experience of it. The relentless efficiency of the knife and fork cutting, stabbing, consuming as quickly as possible can grind the soul down. Choosing the chopsticks is choosing mindfulness.
So what does this all mean? When we pull all of these threads together, the lawyer dropping precedent, the joy of the stray dog, the jazz rhythms, the pirate ship balloon, the foot bath, the chopsticks, what is the ultimate synthesis?
Yeah.
What is Manuel telling us about how to escape captivity?
The synthesis is that liberation isn't about fleeing to a cave in the woods. We live in the modern world. We have to navigate the bureaucracies and the algorithms. But liberation is about changing how we engage with them.
Aye.
It is about choosing the deliberate pacing of the chopsticks over the blind efficiency of the fork. It is choosing to feel the warmth of the foot bath instead of staring into the glow of the laptop. It is about returning to human first principles and rejecting the manufactured urgency that tells you every email is a crisis.
It reminds me of the poem where he explicitly writes about the daily ritual of signing off, actually powering down the computer, letting the AI take a rest from its relentless automated questioning. He advocates for letting the automation die for the day so you can run with the human voices in your head.
Yeah.
So you can let your own messy emotions bubble up and listen to music that actually nourishes the soul rather than just filling the silence. You have to actively, consciously choose to step out of the machine.
And if you don't make that choice, the machine will happily keep you captive until your final days.
So I have to ask you, the listener, what is your foot bath? What is the small analog ritual in your day that grounds you in your physical body? What is the thing you do, whether it's cooking, walking a dog, or listening to jazz that cannot be quantified, monetized, or optimized by an algorithm? Because whatever that deeply inefficient, beautifully human thing is, that is where your freedom lives.
It is essential to fiercely protect those unmonetized spaces.
Well, this has been an absolutely staggering journey today. Let's do a quick recap of the massive ground we've covered in this deep dive. We started in the vibrant, challenging world of the East Harlem public housing projects in the 1950s, tracking the phenomenal intellectual rise of Manuel de Valle Colón.
We saw how he navigated the crucible of Brooklyn tech and how he forced elite institutions like Princeton to expand their historical narratives. We explored a legacy of deep architectural mentorship, laying the groundwork for bilingual education and guiding future titans like Dr. Daniel Ibarrondo and Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor.
From that foundation of external justice, we dove into the internal psychological insights of his upcoming poetry collection, Captive. We examined the modern cages we build for ourselves, the trap of vertical social climbing, the tyranny of billable hours, and how our suppressed ancient biology violently clashes with modern bureaucracy.
We navigated his stark, incredibly prescient warnings about the digital panopticon. We discussed how algorithmic bias, echo chambers, and the facial neutrality of numbers threaten to flatten our diverse realities, and why granting legal personhood to artificial intelligence is a profound threat to human dignity.
And finally, we emerged into the light of his solutions. We learned that breaking free requires returning to basic fairness, embracing the chaotic joy of a stray dog, tapping into ancestral rhythms, and fiercely protecting the simple analog rituals of our daily lives.
The ultimate takeaway from all of this material is that Manuel del Valle y Colón's legacy is beautifully cohesive. Spanning his rigorous legal fight for the unheard and his breathtaking poetic translation of the human soul, he proves that a life dedicated to both justice and beauty is the ultimate rebellion against captivity.
He shows us that you don't have to partition your mind. You can use the rigid structures of the law to protect humanity, and you can use the boundless flow of poetry to understand it.
Well said.
We've talked a lot today about the algorithms, the corporate expectations, and the digital systems that are constantly trying to write the script of your life. So I want to leave you with a final, provocative thought to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. Ask yourself, what invisible script is dictating your actions right now, and what small, beautifully inefficient act of analog rebellion can you commit today to prove that you are still the author?
A brilliant question to carry forward.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. It has been an absolute privilege to explore this incredibly rich work with you. Until next time, stay curious, stay rebellious, and take care of yourselves.
Goodbye, everyone.